I am particularly honored by the invitation to participate as a guest at the 14th Kultaranta Talks, becoming the first African head of state to do so. I look forward to contributing Africa's perspective to discussions on opportunities and challenges shaping a rapidly changing world. Allow me once again to express my very sincere appreciation to His Excellency the President and First Lady Suzanne for their warm hospitality and constructive engagements we have held during this visit. Kenya remains firmly committed to deepening its partnership with Finland and advancing a dynamic, innovative, and mutually beneficial relationship that will continue to serve the interests of the people of our two nations and the generations to come. We agree that Africa must be recognized not merely as a beneficiary of global initiatives, but as an equal partner in shaping solutions to global challenges. Genuine multilateralism requires inclusive participation, equitable representation, and shared responsibility. I thank Finland for its principled support for the United Nations Security Council reform. We reiterate the need for a more representative and equitable Security Council, including fair representation for Africa in both permanent and non-permanent categories of membership. We also agreed to continue working together in support of ongoing efforts to reform the United Nations as it marks its 80th anniversary, and to strengthen its effectiveness, transparency, accountability, and capacity for conflict prevention, mediation, and peace building. In our discussion on regional and global peace and security, we exchanged views on conflicts affecting our respective regions and reaffirmed our commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Kenya and Finland will continue supporting efforts to promote peace and stability in the Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes. I reaffirmed Kenya's long-standing position that dialogue and diplomacy remains the most viable pathway towards a just and lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. On the subject of pandemic in general, we have built a coalition of many countries, because when you talk about a pandemic, you're not talking about a situation that respects boundaries. The Ebola case in DRC is a source of concern for Kenya, as it is a source of concern for all people globally, in our region and globally. And as a responsible nation, we took the very early steps of making sure that we organize ourselves, we prepare ourselves to take head-on whatever situations that would come our way with respect to this pandemic. We have set up along our borders, especially borders that have people who cross from DRC. And just for context, we have thousands of Kenyans in Eastern DRC. We have soldiers in Eastern DRC, and it is natural that for us as a nation, we need to prepare ourselves. So we have set up 23 isolation units, places where we can deal with this challenge. We have tested close to 100,000 people who have come into Kenya, and by God's grace, none of those people have tested positive. In fact, the World Health Organization has reviewed the numbers that were initially put out from 1,000 cases That has now been reviewed as late as yesterday to 500 cases. The number of deaths have also been reviewed downwards from about 250 in June, in early June, to now 100 cases. So much as the pandemic is not as serious as it was originally envisaged, it still remains a source of concern for us as a region and for Kenya in particular. And having a huge diplomatic footprint with the UN office in Nairobi being the only UN office in the global south, and being a diplomatic hub and a regional hub, we have had to raise our standards higher to make sure that we protect all our citizens and also protect all the UN staff and all our friends. That is the requirement of the Constitution of Kenya, and we have taken steps to make sure that our citizens understand this, our friends also understand this, and we have made it possible for friends to come in and support. We have support from different countries. We have support from the United States to manage this situation. They have also offered to set up, of the 23 isolation units, the United States have offered to set up one of them. And we are working together to make sure that we manage this situation. And as I said, for avoidance of doubt, there is no reported case of any Ebola in Kenya so far. As part of a regional approach, the Africa Union is convening a meeting, a virtual meeting, later next week, to be able to rally our support and coordinate response to the Ebola question. The Global South is an integral part of what is the world we live in today. And therefore, the participation, the contribution, the ideas, the suggestions coming from the Global South are as important and as are relevant as suggestions from coming from elsewhere. If I speak the perspective of the Global South biased to the African continent, I will tell you three things. Number one, we believe that we need a paradigm shift in the way Africa is being viewed. For a very long time, it was about colonialism, it was about aid, it was about assistance. It is our very considered view, and this is the position we took at the Africa Forward Summit last month in Nairobi, that going forward, we need a much more forward-looking relationship with our friends and with partners. A forward-looking relationship that takes into account what Africa has to offer. We believe that it is no longer fair to view Africa using the lenses of the challenges that face our region. It's not just about war, it's not just about disease, it's not about poverty. That is a different view. There is a different view to Africa, a view that brings the assets of Africa into the equation. Africa has some of the largest natural resources that can benefit Africa and the world. Africa, number two, has a vast richness in renewable energy resources. Hydro, wind, geothermal. That's why Kenya's grid, for example, is 90% green. Africa also has the world's, 2/3, in fact, of the world's remaining arable land that can feed the world. That is why today, 40% of flowers in Europe come from Kenya. And that can expand to many other things. And number three, Africa has a young, now educated population that presents a good opportunity as a workforce, but also a market. In 20 years, by 2050, Africa will have a quarter of the world's population and will contribute 40% of the world's workforce. It is our considered view that there is need for a paradigm shift in the way Africa is viewed, so that Africa is viewed with the lenses of the opportunities and assets that Africa has to contribute to not just African prosperity, but global prosperity. That's number one. Number two, we believe that we need to work together to resolve some of the hurdles that constrains Africa's growth. And there are three of them. Number one is access, limited access that today defines resources, concessional resources for Africa's development. And number two, to deal with the challenge of unfair financial architecture that limits access to development capital in the capital markets, where Africa pays at disproportionately high interest rates compared to others. The current financial architecture actually penalizes African countries unfairly. And number three, we need to deal with the credit rating agencies that were designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So, and we have ideas on how this can be dealt with. We believe, and we are reorganizing ourselves as a continent. Number one, realizing that the development of our continent is first and foremost our responsibility as African leaders. We do not want to anymore, assign blame to others. We want to take responsibility ourselves for organizing our own economies. And all we are asking for partnership is so that we can mobilize resources from domestic resources from Africa. We have, for example, close to $4 trillion of savings in our pensions, in our insurance companies. These are resources that can be unlocked without asking for money from others. With just guarantees, we can be able to unlock a lot of resources for the development of our continent. And finally, we also believe that for Africa to be able to make useful contribution to global progress and global prosperity, we have to position ourselves appropriately, and that is why we are pushing for a fairer international financial architecture and a reformed international governance, where the UN recognizes 1.5 billion people in Africa, 54 countries that today have no say in the UN Security Council. They are not represented, and it completely undermines the credibility of the UN system. We believe in that reform, and I'm very happy that we share this position with Finland, that there is need for reform of the international financial architecture, there is need for reform of the international governance architecture, so that we bring the ideas, the contributions, the suggestions of every part of the globe. That is how we're going to move forward together. That is my take on the contribution of the Global South to global progress. These agreements and commitments are instruments of action that reflect our shared determination to deepen collaboration, expand opportunity, and deliver tangible benefits to our people. We are fully committed to ensuring their effective implementation. On multilateral cooperation and global development, Kenya and Finland reaffirmed our shared commitment to a rules-based international order and a fair, inclusive global financial system. I briefed President Stubb on the outcome of the Africa Forward Summit, co-hosted by Kenya and France in May, which called for reforms to sovereign credit rating systems and increased financing for green industrialization and digital infrastructure. I am encouraged that President Stubb, in his reflection on the changing global order, recognizes Kenya among the emerging countries, helping to shape a more inclusive international system. This perspective reinforces our shared belief that developing nations must play a greater role in addressing global challenges and shaping global solutions. It is an honor to undertake this state visit to Finland, following the successful state visit by President Stubb to Kenya last year. As the first head of state visit by a Kenyan president to Finland, and only the second presidential visit between our countries in nearly 4 decades. This visit marks an important milestone in our bilateral relations. Kenya and Finland have enjoyed a strong and enduring friendship since the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1965. Our partnership is founded on shared values: democracy, sustainable development, peace, human dignity, and respect for the rule of law. Our engagement today reaffirms not only the strength of the relations between our two countries, but also our shared determination to build a future defined by innovation, sustainability, prosperity, and mutual progress. I thank His Excellency the President for this gracious invitation and steadfast commitment to strengthening ties between our two countries. We have further signed a memorandum of understanding on cooperation in the areas of circular economy, bioeconomy, and climate change. This partnership will strengthen collaboration in environmental sustainability, climate resilience, resource efficiency, and green growth, while supporting our shared commitment to climate action and sustainable development. In addition, we agreed to deepen cooperation in health, including universal health coverage, maternal, child, and mental health, medical research, and the local manufacture of essential medical supplies and vaccines. And I also shared Kenya's ongoing efforts under Taifa Care to ensure accessible and affordable health care for all citizens. To advance shared prosperity, we agreed to strengthen trade and investment ties and accelerate implementation of the Kenya-European Union Economic Partnership Agreement, to which Kenya and the EU are signatories. I thank His Excellency the President for facilitating engagement between our business communities and creating new opportunities for commercial cooperation, and we will be engaging with the business community in the course of this visit. President Stubb and I have held candid, constructive, and highly productive discussions aimed at deepening cooperation across a broad range of strategic sectors. Together, we reviewed the state of our bilateral relations and agreed on practical measures to strengthen collaboration, expand economic opportunity, and advance sustainable development. Finland remains an important partner for Kenya in Europe, while Kenya continues to serve as a gateway to East Africa and a strategic hub for trade, investment, innovation, and regional connectivity. We reaffirm our commitment to building a modern and mutually beneficial partnership that responds to the aspirations of the people of Kenya and the people of Finland. To give concrete expression to the outcomes of our discussions and the shared ambition of our partnership, The President and I have witnessed the signing of 3 memoranda of understanding covering education, digitalization and innovation, and environmental cooperation. These agreements reflect the growing depth and practical orientation of relationship between our 2 countries. To strengthen cooperation in education and skills development, we have signed a memorandum of understanding that will expand collaboration in technical and vocational training, teacher development, competence-based learning, and education innovation. Kenya will continue to draw valuable lessons from Finland's globally recognized education system as we advance our competence-based education and training.
At the bilateral level, we're strengthening our economic ties. I'm delighted that you, Mr. President, are accompanied by a business delegation focused on technology, digitalization, and sustainability. I see great potential in partnering with Kenya, the gateway to East Africa. So thank you, William, for this important visit. I'm delighted that we will continue our discussions at the Kultaranta talks off the western coast of Finland at our summer residence, where the President will be my guest. I look forward to further strengthening the partnership between Finland and Kenya. Over to you. As 2 countries that support multilateral institutions, rules and norms, I believe that we can work on this together. Now, our calculation is that right now there's a tension between 2 competing views on how the world should be run. One is what we call multipolarity. That for me is about deals, transactions, and quite often the rule of the big. They basically run the show, big power politics. Then on the other side, you have multilateralism, which for me is international institutions, rules and norms, and essentially cooperation. It is a system that has benefited a small country like Finland throughout our independence. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it has been a cornerstone of our success, together, of course, with democracy, freedom, rule of law, fundamental rights, human rights, the values that Kenya and Finland share. So then we have to ask ourselves the question, who are the ones who can work together with us? And the answer is the Global South, in a very broad view. Because if I ask my friends in the Global South, and most of my friends in the Global West as well, and the Global North, they support multilateral institutions. But how do we bring back the UN to become the key peace mediator in the world? Well, we do it by reforming the UN institutions, because the power structure of the UN was created in a post-World War II era as the image of the victors at the time. That's why we have now called for the doubling of the UN Security Council members, which means at least 1 for Latin America, 2 for Africa, and 2 for Asia. Because otherwise, if you don't feel that you have agency in that institution, you're not going to want to deal with it. And the same goes, I think, for the reform of the financial institutions, whether it's the WTO, whether it's the IMF, the World Bank. And one revelation that I had in our conversation today is also linked to the way in which we see the credit rating institutions. So I think we have a lot to work here together, and I believe that the Global South is going to be the one that decides the next world order. And that's why I'm very happy to have William here as well to discuss the matter. Kenya is a strong voice for Africa in efforts to reform and strengthen the multilateral system. I look forward to continuing this cooperation next time around, most probably in the United Nations General Assembly Week in September. In our discussions today, we've talked about Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. We've talked about the war in Sudan and DRC, and we have talked about the wars ranging in the Middle East. For Finland, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine remains our major concern. But every conflict around the world is now linked one to the other. And the big problem that we have is that many of the conflicts used to be local. Now they're regional, and suddenly they all have global impact. I welcome Kenya's support for the principles of the UN Charter and international law, including sovereignty and territorial integrity. You have been such a voice of reason internationally, not only in the past 4 years, but before that as well. President Ruto gave me an overview of the situation in Sudan, which is the most serious humanitarian crisis of our time. I commend Kenya's active role in mediation and conflict resolution. We recognize the global impacts of war, including on food security, energy prices, developing economies, which of course underlines the importance of cooperation between Europe and Africa. This is in many ways a historic day in the sense that the last state visit of a Kenyan president was in 1987, and the first state visit of a Finnish president in Kenya was last year. We hope that your visit to Finland will be as memorable as our visit was to Kenya. Today, we see the need to really deepen our relations. Kenya is an active and influential player in promoting stability and economic development, both regionally and globally. Kenya is very much a middle power, a voice that needs to be heard around the globe, and I'm particularly happy that the President has just visited Belgium to meet with European institutions, and then Norway and Finland before he heads off to a very important G7 meeting in France. This is Kenyan impact at its best. Kenya's importance to Finland and Europe is growing in terms of trade, investment, development, and security. At the global level, we have so much to do together. We're both strong supporters of multilateralism and the rules-based international order. We both work to bring the fight against climate change more strongly to the global agenda. We also share a vision for a stronger United Nations, which is more effective and reflects the realities of the world today. That, in my mind, also must mean a stronger voice for the African continent.